No one could have imagined that an elderly couple living in one of California's most peaceful neighborhoods would become the victims of a crime so brutal it still haunts the community. Dozens of wounds covered their bodies. The scene was spotless, and the details that followed left everyone gripped by fear. Watch until the end. You'll understand why this case continues to send chills down spines more than a decade later. Don't look away. Every second counts. April 2013. Davis, the most populous city in Yolo County, California. Oliver Jennings Northup Jr., known to many as Chip, was born in 1,925-inch Grand Island, Nebraska. He had served in the U.S. Navy during World War II before pursuing a career as an attorney. While he had a deep appreciation for the law, those close to him noted his lifelong gravitation toward the arts and literature. He was an avid reader, known for reciting classic literary passages from memory. Music also played a central role in his life. Since his 30s, he had performed in various bands as a guitarist. Chip was one of the founding members of the Unitarian Universalist Church of Davis. Claudia Maureen Maupin, born in 1936, was described by her daughter as someone on a spiritual journey, exploring various faiths before finding a deep resonance with the Unitarian Church. Her bond with that community was so immediate and strong that she once remarked to her daughter that her future husband would be there, and she turned out to be right. Claudia met Chip through the church, and the two fell in love. They married in 1996. She later became a pastoral associate at the same church, and like Chip, she loved the performing arts, actively participating in local theater productions. Her family recalled her as someone with a radiant spirit who made others feel deeply valued. Together, Claudia and Chip built a large, blended family. Claudia had 3 children of her own, and Chip had 6, plus 2 stepchildren from a prior marriage. Between them, they were grandparents to 14 and great-grandparents to 8. By 2013, they had been married for 17 years and were living in a condo on Cowell Boulevard. Their families described their lives as peaceful and deeply fulfilling, enriched by a strong community and surrounded by love. That serenity would be shattered in April of that year by a series of events that no one could have foreseen. Daniel William Marsh was born on May 14, 1997. In 2008, he briefly became a national hero after receiving an American Red Cross Heroes Award for saving his father's life using CPR during a heart attack. However, that same year marked a turning point. His parents began a turbulent and acrimonious divorce after it came to light that his mother had been involved in an affair with Daniel's former kindergarten teacher. The revelation deeply affected him. At just 10 years old, he began to harbor violent fantasies, targeting the woman involved in the affair. He fantasized about killing the woman, either by applying pressure to her neck or attacking her with a sharp object. By the following year, Daniel confided in a therapist about these fantasies and his growing fascination with torture. He admitted that he wished to act on these dark impulses. As a result, he was diagnosed with adjustment disorder, with depressed mood. When he started 7th grade, he was referred to a clinical social worker, and in August 2010, he began a regimen of Prozac, taking 1 to 2 capsules daily. During his teenage years, Daniel moved back and forth between his parents' separate homes. But at age 14, he was permanently expelled from his father's household due to ongoing issues with alcohol and smoking, eventually settling with his mother. In 2011, he was diagnosed with anorexia and placed in an intensive outpatient treatment program. After his release, he cycled through several medications, first Celexa, then Lexapro, and eventually back to Prozac. He was also prescribed antipsychotics. A physician would later observe that Daniel began experiencing episodes of derealization, including frequent out-of-body sensations that occurred multiple times each week. As time progressed, Daniel's violent ideations intensified. Each time he encountered someone, he imagined how he would take their life. He became deeply immersed in disturbing online content, particularly a site called bestgore.com, which showcased graphic and pornographic violence. His obsession wasn't limited to virtual imagery. He began setting fires and harming animals. Daniel developed an unhealthy interest in serial killers, particularly Jeffrey Dahmer and Ted Bundy. According to one friend, he once applied pressure to the neck of a cat on the street and casually remarked that he hated doing it. He even asked if he could harm his friend's dog. These impulses weren't entirely hidden. Daniel confided in a school counselor, prompting a police intervention and his involuntary hospitalization. His medications were adjusted once more. But his disclosures grew darker. In a conversation with the school psychologist, he admitted that he had once thought about killing a classmate, possibly through a planned attack involving a weapon at school. Another visit to the school by law enforcement followed, but officials concluded that he did not pose a threat to himself or others, and no further steps were taken. During a later counseling session, Daniel elaborated further, describing in detail his disturbing urges to carry out strange acts on his own body. He admitted these fantasies represented only a fraction of what he envisioned and that he had ceased resisting them. However, because he had not named any specific targets, the information was never escalated. Daniel no longer made efforts to conceal the darkness inside him. He began sharing more of his disturbing thoughts with peers. Some of them would later recall how he had already decided that if ever caught for murder, he would plead insanity. His fantasies were no longer just internal soon. They would erupt into horrifying reality. That morning, Chip and Claudia's absence from church raised immediate concern. It was highly unusual. No one had heard from them, and their phone calls went unanswered. Later in the day, Chip failed to appear for a scheduled performance with his band, something entirely out of character after nearly 5 decades as their consistent guitarist and lead vocalist. His son, Robert, visited the couple's condo, but finding no sign of distress, he assumed they had perhaps left town unexpectedly. As evening approached and silence persisted, worry turned to alarm. Family members contacted local authorities to request a welfare check. Claudia's daughter, Laura, accompanied the police back to the condo. After receiving no answer at the door, she walked around the property. At the rear, they discovered a window with a slashed screen. Peering through the bedroom window, they saw stains that resembled blood. Using a flashlight, officers scanned the room and were met with a horrifying sight: the bodies of 8 7-year-old Chip and 7 6-year-old Claudia. Both had been repeatedly attacked with a sharp object, and their bodies showed signs of extreme and horrifying violence. The Yolo County District Attorney described the killings as the most depraved he had ever encountered in his career. The murders of such a cherished couple sent shockwaves through the Davis community. Investigators from multiple jurisdictions, including 25 FBI agents, were immediately assigned to the case. Yet the crime scene yielded no physical clues. There was no DNA, no fingerprints, no footprints. Nothing appeared to have been stolen, and there were no obvious signs of forced entry, raising suspicions that the killer, or killers, may have been familiar with the victims, possibly even in possession of a key. The slashed window screen could have been a deliberate red herring. Oliver, Chip's grandson, briefly became a person of interest when investigators learned that he had been diagnosed with schizophrenia. Robert, Chip's son and Oliver's father, later recalled that the family endured 2 grueling days of interrogations, each stretching over 12 hours. Despite the pressure, Robert believed his father would have urged them to fully cooperate, so they continued without legal counsel. During a search of Robert's home, police noted that the carpets had been steam cleaned on the same day as the murders, an unfortunate coincidence that, while suspicious on the surface, Robert insisted was just a matter of bad timing. Authorities also discovered a drawing by Robert's son, Tony, which depicted a man wielding a sharp object, standing over 2 children in bed. The family was quick to emphasize that both Tony and Oliver had shared a deep bond with Chip, and it was inconceivable that either would harbor any violent intent toward him or Claudia. Despite the lack of evidence, the pressure took a toll. Tony, in particular, felt relentlessly scrutinized and stigmatized, burdened by the implicit suspicions of others. Even after he was officially cleared, he couldn't shake the feeling of being silently judged. The emotional weight of the investigation haunted him, and tragically, 3 years after the murder, Tony made a drastic decision. While police continued to chase leads, the actual killer showed no intention of hiding. On the very day the bodies were discovered, Daniel Marsh revealed to a close friend that he had committed the murders. The following day, he repeated the confession to others. When he asked his girlfriend whether she had heard about the couple's deaths and she replied she hadn't, he declared himself the killer, smiling and detailing the act with pride. He described how incredible it had felt. Daniel's compulsion to boast didn't stop. In the days and weeks that followed, he spoke freely to anyone willing to listen, claiming it was the most thrilling experience of his life. As if his confessions weren't enough, he even showed a friend the items he had used in the crime: his knife, gloves, ski cap, boots, and jacket. After Daniel confessed the murders to both his girlfriend and a close friend, the two began speaking to each other about what he had said. At first, they chose not to report it to anyone. They remained unsure whether Daniel was being serious, and if he was, they feared the consequences of confronting or exposing him. Oddly, Daniel's demeanor seemed to brighten following the killings. He behaved as if relieved, even earning the title of Student of the Month. Their doubts deepened when one of Daniel's friends informed the school that Daniel had started carrying a knife with him. As a result, he was suspended. Not long after, his girlfriend broke up with him. The situation took a darker turn when Daniel secretly entered her home, leaving her terrified. She confided in a friend, who then decided to speak to Daniel's father, Bill. Despite hearing about the murders and Daniel's alleged involvement, Bill refused to believe it. With nowhere else to turn, the friends brought their concerns to the police. Authorities acted swiftly. On the 17th of June, a high school resource officer brought Daniel in for questioning. The interrogation was led by Detective Ariel Pineda and FBI Special Agent Chris Campion. Daniel initially denied everything. He spent over 3 hours crying and insisting he had nothing to do with the murders. His tone shifted only when presented with a recorded phone call implicating him directly. Confronted with the evidence, he began to confess. Daniel admitted to having studied the traits of psychopaths and sociopaths online. He explained how he identified with them more as he grew older, particularly in his inability to feel empathy for others. He confessed to wanting to hurt and kill, though he expressed an internal conflict, acknowledging that while these urges felt innate, he wished he didn't have them. His statements painted a chilling portrait of someone both aware of his darkness and powerless or unwilling to fight it. During his confession, Daniel admitted that he had left his mother's house in the early hours of the morning with the deliberate intention of killing someone. Between 2 and 3 a.m., he walked the streets of Davis, carrying a 6-inch sharp object, searching for homes with unlocked doors or accessible windows. Eventually, he found what he was looking for at 4006 Cal Boulevard, just 2 doors down from his father's residence. He cut through a window screen and entered the home. Once inside, he waited in the living room until he could hear snoring from the bedroom. When he entered the room, Claudia woke up and screamed. Daniel began attacking her in the abdomen while she pleaded for her life. Chip, awakened by the noise, also became a target. Daniel turned the knife on him and continued the assault. He later admitted to continuing his attacks on both victims even after they had died, stating that the act gave him a disturbing sense of ease and satisfaction. Daniel provided investigators with explicit and disturbing details of the murders. He revealed that he had saved the blood-stained clothes and the knife, storing them in his mother's garage as keepsakes. He had also wrapped tape around his shoes to prevent leaving behind footprints. According to him, the experience was accompanied by overwhelming feelings of euphoria, describing the rush of happiness, adrenaline, and dopamine that consumed him during the killings. The interrogation took an even darker turn when Daniel began discussing how his violent fantasies extended to nearly everyone he encountered. He described seeing flashes of imagined violence whenever he looked at others. When prompted to elaborate, he outlined various methods he had envisioned to kill the interrogating agent. His suggestions were graphic, brutal, and delivered without malice, an indication that his thoughts were not driven by hatred, but by compulsion. Daniel was formally charged with 2 counts of first-degree murder, accompanied by multiple special enhancements. These included intentionally killing more than one person, committing the crimes with exceptional depravity, lying in wait before attacking, and inflicting torture upon the victims. Additional charges related to his use of a deadly weapon were also filed. The contrast between his early public image as a child hero and his arrest as a teenage double murderer created a chilling narrative that quickly spread through the media. Despite being only 16, Daniel was charged as an adult, a decision that underscored the gravity of his crimes. Reporters covered the unfolding developments from Davis, highlighting searches carried out by the FBI, including at the home of Daniel's mother. Outside, a newspaper lay untouched on the driveway, its front page reporting her son's arrest. For the Northup family, particularly Chip's daughter Mary, the reality was devastating. She had hoped her father and Claudia had passed without knowing what was happening. Now, the details forced her to confront an unimaginable truth. Mary expressed a deep understanding of what her father, a lifelong advocate for justice, would have wanted. She believed he would have supported a fair trial for Daniel, even in the face of such horrific violence. Though she was confident her father would oppose the death penalty, she also knew he would demand accountability, that people must face consequences for their actions. Daniel's arraignment was scheduled, and he entered a plea of not guilty, later amending it to not guilty by reason of insanity, something investigators had already anticipated. As a minor, Daniel was not eligible for capital punishment or life imprisonment without parole. The harshest sentence he could receive was 52 years to life. His legal team, made up of two prominent public defenders, argued that such a sentence would amount to cruel and unusual punishment for someone so young. Prosecutors, however, pushed for the maximum allowable penalty. In their view, anything less would be unjust, given the calculated nature and brutality of the crimes. Assistant Chief Deputy D.A. Michael Cabral stated that in nearly 30 years as a prosecutor, he had never encountered such a brutal and disturbing act or a defendant with such a dark nature. Daniel's defense team brought in psychiatrist Dr. Matthew Soulier. During their first meeting, Daniel threatened to kill him. The psychiatrist diagnosed Daniel as mentally ill, but still sane and accountable for his actions. Despite this, the defense continued to pursue an insanity plea and filed a motion to suppress Daniel's the 17th of June confession, claiming the interrogation had started under misleading circumstances and that Daniel repeatedly asked to leave. They also argued that the many medications he had been prescribed over the years had significantly shaped his violent fantasies. The prosecution countered that his disturbing thoughts had existed well before any medication was introduced. Daniel Marsh's trial began on the 2nd of September, 2014. He was now 17, and the case was presided over by Judge David Reed. Prosecutors claimed Daniel had waited inside the victim's home, then attacked and tortured them in their final moments. Media coverage noted that the courtroom was completely full, with no empty seats. For security reasons, sheriff's deputies escorted Daniel into the courthouse through a side entrance, shielding him with a jacket. Though being tried as an adult, he was still a juvenile and kept separate from other inmates. He entered the courtroom through a side door, hidden from public view, including that of his father and friends present in court. Marsh responded with one-word answers as he waived his right to a preliminary hearing within 10 days. The judge denied him bail, and whispers of agreement could be heard from the victim's family members. He was accused of killing 8 7-year-old Oliver Chip Northup and 7 6-year-old Claudia Maupin that April. Some of his friends, who had seen him shortly before the arrest, struggled to believe he could have committed such a crime. To them, he had always appeared joyful and harmless. Prosecutors did not disclose a motive or any specific connection between Marsh and the victims. It was noted, however, that his father had lived near the couple until recently and had listed the house for sale. Since Marsh was being tried as an adult, local media decided to release his name and show his face. His defense attorney requested to ban cameras from the courtroom, but the judge denied the motion. He did, however, permit Marsh to wear a dress shirt and tie instead of standard jail clothes. The defense argued that the medications Marsh had been prescribed, combined with his mental health problems, caused a violent outburst beyond his control and left him temporarily insane. Prosecutors disagreed, stating that the killings were carefully premeditated. Former friends, His ex-girlfriend and several past therapists testified about their interactions with Marsh, offering insight into his behavior and mental state in the period leading up to the crime. On the 26th of September, 2014, after a 5-week trial and fewer than 2 hours of jury deliberations, the verdict was unanimous. Daniel William Marsh was found guilty of both counts of first-degree murder and all related special circumstances. The jury's next task was to assess his mental state at the time of the killings. 4 days later, they returned a second unanimous decision. Daniel had been sane when he committed the crimes. Judge David Reed subsequently sentenced him to the maximum penalty, life in prison with the possibility of parole after 52 years. The sentence was structured as 25 years to life for each murder, with an additional 2 years added due to special enhancements. Judge Reed underscored the methodical nature of the crime. Daniel had not acted impulsively. His actions were deliberate, premeditated, and marked by a disturbing level of curiosity. The judge remarked that carrying out such acts on the victims' bodies reflected not only cruelty, but also a calculated detachment, leaving no room for leniency. California's evolving juvenile sentencing laws soon complicated the legal outcome. With the passage of Senate Bill 260, offenders sentenced to less than 25 years to life could be considered for parole after serving 20 years. Those with sentences greater than that, like Daniel, would become eligible at the 25-year mark. In 2016, Proposition 57 further reshaped the system, requiring juvenile court judges to determine whether a minor should be tried as an adult. Then, a 2018 California Supreme Court ruling made these provisions retroactive for cases still pending resolution. That same year, in February, the California Court of Appeal conditionally reversed Daniel's 2014 conviction. The court ordered a transfer hearing to determine whether he should remain under adult sentencing. As legal proceedings continued, Governor Jerry Brown signed Senate Bill 1391 into law, which prohibited anyone under the age of 16 from being tried in adult court. The law sparked widespread opposition, particularly from prosecutors and the families of Chip and Claudia, who saw it as a betrayal of justice for 2 innocent lives brutally taken. In September 2018, the California District Attorney Association held a press conference urging the governor to veto the bill. The family of Chip and Claudia spoke publicly, emphasizing the harm Daniel had caused. At the same time, prosecutors submitted an open letter to Governor Brown, stating that Senate Bill 1391 removed the court's authority to determine whether a 14 or 5-year-old charged with certain serious offenses was unsuitable for the juvenile system. Regarding Daniel, the letter described him as having brutally tortured and murdered an elderly couple in their home and carefully planned the attack. It wasn't just the victims' families who expressed outrage. Citizens of Davis sent over 300 letters to the court, opposing the idea of Daniel being placed in the juvenile justice system. When Governor Brown signed the bill into law, he emphasized the importance of redemption and the need to reform young offenders rather than send them to adult prisons, where the likelihood of long-term criminal behavior increases. He acknowledged, however, that the testimonies from Chip and Claudia's family had deeply affected him. Amid the ongoing legal battles, a video was uploaded to YouTube showing Daniel Marsh delivering a TED-style talk from prison titled "Embracing Our Humanity." In it, he discussed alleged abuse and challenges from his past, and claimed to be reformed and deserving of a second chance. The video caused deep pain and distress to the families of Chip and Claudia, as well as to others affected by his crimes. YouTube removed the video within 2 days, but it remains accessible online. For the victims' families, the takedown was a small victory, insignificant compared to the legal fight still ahead. Daniel's defense team filed a motion to postpone his transfer hearing until after January, when Senate Bill 1391 would officially go into effect. Their aim was clear: to buy time so the new law could be applied retroactively in his favor. Prosecutors, however, countered that the case must proceed under the current legal framework, not under speculative future legislation. The court ultimately sided with the prosecution, and the hearing moved forward without delay. During the proceedings, Daniel took the stand to personally argue why he believed his case belonged in the juvenile court system. He acknowledged that he had previously told prison therapists he couldn't remember the offense, but admitted that the claim wasn't truthful. He stated that the nature of his crime was so horrific that he had repressed it out of fear and shame. His words were intended to convey emotional growth, an attempt to demonstrate that he was capable of rehabilitation. The prosecution, however, presented powerful counter-evidence. Forensic psychologist Matthew Logan was called to testify. As an expert in psychopathy, Logan revealed that Daniel had scored 35.8 out of a possible 40 on the standardized psychopathy checklist, a score he described as one of the highest he had ever encountered. The courtroom grew tense as Judge Samuel McAdam prepared to deliver his ruling on whether Daniel would remain in adult custody or be transferred back to the juvenile system. The judge ultimately ruled in favor of the prosecution. He determined that Daniel posed a continued and serious risk to society, concluding there was virtually no likelihood of meaningful rehabilitation before the age of 25. Daniel was remanded to state prison to serve out his adult sentence. Claudia's daughter, Victoria, publicly expressed relief, noting that the original conviction in 2014 had delivered justice. This hearing, she emphasized, was about ensuring public safety. Within weeks, Daniel filed a writ requesting that the transfer order be reviewed on grounds that the hearing had occurred before the new law took effect. The writ was denied, but legal challenges were far from over. On the 14th of December, 2018, Daniel Marsh's legal team filed a petition requesting that the order denying his previous writ be reviewed. The arguments remained largely unchanged, challenging the legitimacy of the prior decision in light of new legislation. However, on the 13th of February, 2019, the California Supreme Court denied the petition. With Senate Bill 1391 now fully in effect, Daniel's lawyers moved forward with a new appeal. This time, they requested that his conviction be overturned retroactively, asserting that his original trial as an adult was no longer valid under the revised law. The legal debate gained broader media attention. As journalists followed the story, public focus returned to the original crime. Daniel Marsh had murdered Oliver Northup and Claudia Maupin in 2013 when he was just 15 years old. Yet, Senate Bill 139, passed 5 years later, stated that minors under 16 could not be tried in adult court. Daniel's defense argued this should apply to him retroactively, despite the severity of his offenses and his prior sentencing in adult court. By 2021, Daniel Marsh, now 24 years old, was seeking early release from prison. His attorney contended before a remote panel of judges that the original adult conviction lacked legal standing under the current law. Prosecutors, however, maintained that his conviction was finalized in 2018, and no further appeals should be allowed. Claudia Maupin's family, particularly her eldest daughter, continued to speak out publicly. They stressed that Daniel had confessed, endured a full trial, and had already been sentenced to 52 years to life. They were determined to protect that outcome. Among the most disturbing revelations was the family's claim that, while in prison, Daniel had tattoos created on his body that mirrored the wounds inflicted on Claudia. To the family, this was evidence of continued depravity and a lack of remorse. A new hearing was scheduled for the 18th of August, 2021, before the California Court of Appeals. Should Daniel succeed, he could be released as early as May 14, 2022, without supervision, parole, or a public record of his crimes. For the victim's family, this represented not only a miscarriage of justice, but a terrifying possibility that the man who murdered their loved ones might walk free after just 8 years. On the 14th of December, 2018, Daniel Marsh's legal team submitted a petition requesting a reconsideration of the denial of his writ. This petition reiterated the same points raised in the original writ. However, on the 13th of February, 2019, the California Supreme Court rejected the petition, maintaining the original denial. Following the implementation of a new state law, Daniel's lawyers filed another appeal. This time, they argued that his conviction should be overturned retroactively. In 2013, when he was 15, Daniel Marsh had murdered Oliver Northup and Claudia Maupin. But a 2018 state law prohibited the prosecution of individuals under 16 as adults, potentially applying to his case. The case drew renewed attention, especially from those who had followed it for years. Many pointed to a broader belief, rooted in developmental research, that juvenile offenders can often be rehabilitated. Yet California officials viewed Daniel Marsh as a possible exception to this principle. By 2021, Marsh, then 24 years old, was seeking early release from prison. His attorney argued that Marsh had never been legitimately tried as an adult, despite the severity of the crime. On the opposing side, the state emphasized that Marsh's conviction had already been finalized in 2018 and warned against putting the victim's family through repeated appeals. One of Claudia Maupin's daughters recounted the lasting impact of the crime. The family had endured a 5-week trial in 2014 that ended in a sentence of 52 years to life for Marsh, who was then incarcerated at Donovan Correctional Facility in San Diego. Under Proposition 57, passed in 2008, Marsh was granted a fitness hearing to assess whether his case should be transferred to juvenile court. Complicating the situation further, while in prison, Marsh had reportedly tattooed images representing the victim's wounds on his body, raising deeper concerns about his mental state. Marsh appealed the decision from that hearing, requesting retroactive consideration under Senate Bill 1391. The hearing in the California Court of Appeal was scheduled for the 18th of August, 2021. If successful, Marsh could potentially be released by May 14, 2022, without parole supervision, with his criminal record sealed despite having served only 8 years for a double homicide. Although some members of the victim's family made it clear they harbored no desire for revenge, there was deep relief knowing that Daniel Marsh would not be walking free anytime soon. Had the appeal succeeded, his release could have coincided with his 25th birthday, less than a year away. Instead, the original sentence remained intact, ensuring he would continue serving time behind bars. Senate Bill 1391, which had sparked the appeal, was part of California's broader juvenile justice reform. It amended Proposition 57 with the goal of shielding offenders under 16 from being tried as adults. But despite multiple hearings, shifting legislation, and persistent legal motions, the 3rd District Court ultimately dismissed Marsh's appeal in September 2021. His 2-year-to-life sentence was upheld, although due to the nature of his juvenile conviction, he may still be eligible for parole after serving 25 years. If granted, he could be released in his early 42nd. The consequences of Daniel Marsh's actions continue to cast a long shadow. Law enforcement officers involved in the case, including the lead interrogator, described him as one of the most disturbing individuals they had ever encountered. His demeanor and the nature of the crime led them to believe he had all the hallmarks of a future serial killer. For the family and community left behind, the emotional burden has never fully lifted. Beyond the devastating loss of Oliver "Chip" Northup and Claudia Maupin, they've had to endure years of legal uncertainty and the looming threat of Marsh's possible release. Yet through each hearing and every public appearance, the victims' loved ones have remained steadfast. They continue to speak out, honor the lives lost, and advocate for justice. Let us never forget the memory of Chip and Claudia, a couple known for their warmth, wisdom, and compassion. If this story moved you, please consider sharing it. Subscribe to our channel for more true crime stories, and help us amplify the voices of those who can no longer speak for themselves.